Hello, my name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I am so glad that you are here with us for this important conversation with Dr. Roni Cohen Sandler. It is the mission of the Glenbard Parent Series to present distinguished speakers with research-based strategies to empower, inform, inspire, and connect families around the positive development of youth. We're so happy you could be here. We're so grateful to our sponsors who make this all possible. You saw the slide of our annual sponsors and our community allies. If you are a social media person, please do share, like us on Facebook, and let everyone know that GPS is for anyone and everyone. We have programming to deal with parents and caregivers of the youngest all the way up to college. And I hope that you will let others know that they're absolutely welcome to join us. The format, Roni will be speaking for about 45, 50 minutes. We will answer questions, time permitting, in the chat and Q&A. This presentation is being recorded. And if you enjoy the program, which I know you will, please call someone and let them know we will be back at 7 p.m. this evening. Without further ado, let me please introduce to you Josh Chambers, Glenbard Assistant Superintendent of Human Services. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you very much, Gilda. I'm very excited to be here today. This is one of those presentations I signed up to do the introduction because I have a tween daughter myself, and I'm really excited to hear what Roni has to say. So without any further ado, let me introduce her. Dr. Roni Cohen Sandler, she has a PhD and she is a licensed clinical psychologist, author, and speaker with decades of experience assessing and treating adolescents and adults. She's an expert, and she's been presented on the Oprah Winfrey Show, Today, CBS, Good Morning America, and PBS, among many others. She's been featured in print in many major outlets, including the New York Times, Newsweek, Marie Claire, and Teen Vogue. She is the author of I'm Not Mad, I Just Hate You, Stressed Out Girls, and Trust Me, Mom, Everyone is Going. We are delighted to have her return to the Glenbard Parent Series to discuss her most recent book, Anything But My Phone, Mom, Raising Resilient Girls and Boys in the Digital Age. Along with her husband, she divides her time between Connecticut and Los Angeles. Now let's please welcome Dr. Cohen Sandler.
Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today. It is such an honor for me to be back here. I have such warm feelings about Glenbard. I remember that years and years ago, I came and visited, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences. Excuse me while I have a few little, oh, there we go. I had a wonderful experience because not only did I get to speak to the parents, but I also got to speak to the students, which was really, really special. So I'm very happy to be here today, and I thank you all for joining us. I want to talk a little bit about why I think it's so important to talk about this subject. And there are really four reasons. One is that digital technology is so ubiquitous today. The 2018 Pew Research report said that 95% of students were using smartphones, and half of them were on them all the time. And I should note that that's the most recent year for which those statistics are available. But then we had COVID right after that. And I believe that most studies were showing that pretty much all kids were on their technology for good reason, but we'll talk about that. The very new statistic that I came across, which just came out in 2022, is that the majority, that is 53% of students, have their own smartphones by age 11. So this is a trend that I think makes all parents concerned. And I know most of you have high school students, but some of you may have junior high school students, or even elementary students, or be grandparents or teachers. So I think this will all pertain to you. And the other part of the 2022 study for Pew Research noted that US teens were on the internet daily, almost all, like 100%, which is a huge increase. 95% of them were on some form of social media, whether it be YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, Snapchat, and 35% of them admitted to being on at least one platform constantly. So this is something that we can't ignore. You know, we can't just stick our heads in the sand. We have to deal with. It's also here to stay. I remember years ago when social media first came about and parents were thinking, oh, this is a phase. They really won't be doing this long. They'll get tired of it. And that was pretty much wishful thinking. Now, the thing is that some of those platforms that they were on in those days have gone by the wayside, but there are new ones cropping up all the time. So the 2022 Pew Research showed that Facebook is pretty much for older people now. Reddit has kind of gone by the wayside. Even Tumblr is on the way out. Tumblr was what was used by students when they first got on social media. TikTok, as we all know, is in, for better or for worse. And so the reality is that even if we wanted to eliminate social media, we really can't, because there are always new ones cropping up and students are really drawn to this. And in many ways, that's how they communicate with their peers. So we have to figure out how to deal with it. The other thing that I want to say is I'm not one of these people who think that technology is so terrible, that it's all so bad. And I think that's important because, number one, it's not true. But number two, also, if you have that attitude with your kids, that if you're really afraid of technology and social media, and if you think it's inherently bad and it's going to harm your child, it's going to affect the way you come across with them. And so I think it's really worth noting all the benefits that I see, both personally and professionally. So obviously, when kids were doing remote or hybrid learning during the pandemic, they needed technology for their schooling. And in fact, the kids who really suffered the most were those who didn't have the resources to have technology to stay connected, right? And also, technology is allowing them to have all kinds of information at their fingertips. During the pandemic, it was especially important because they couldn't go to places where they could normally get information. But it's still true that not everybody has transportation, not everybody has those kind of availabilities. And so having this at their fingertips is for sure enhancing their educational experience. Another one, especially during the pandemic, was connecting with peers. And many people have felt, and this is researchers, have felt that even though our tweens and teens and even younger kids suffered a lot during the pandemic, it would have been much worse had they not been able to connect with their peers via technology. It gave them some sense of connection, which was very much needed in terms of emotional support at this age. And it also gave them support and a sense of normalcy amid a whole world that was not normal. Entertainment was important too. They needed an outlet for things, right? They learned hobbies that they had never learned before. I saw this in my practice. They had the resources and the time to get into things that they'd always wanted to know more about, but hadn't had the opportunity to do. And also, because so many grandparents were so vulnerable and other relatives were so vulnerable, they were isolated from their immediate families and extended families. And this gave them a chance to stay connected with grandparents, which was really a help to everyone involved. And last, even though I'm not a super fan of video games, I did find that during the pandemic, instead of kids playing individual kind of games, it became a community for them. They played multiplayer games, and basically it was their social group that got together on a regular basis. And in playing video games together, it really was an opportunity for them to talk and interact and do things, again, the kind of thing that they would do sort of in the cafeteria or in gym and things like that. So another area that was fantastic and continues to be is stress reduction. Obviously, it was a very stressful time during the pandemic, but for a lot of kids, life is stressful. And the kinds of things that they were accessing were extremely important. And studies show that watching YouTube videos, especially funny ones, was a way of kind of letting out the stress of the day and being able to relax before going to sleep. They were sharing, funny cat memes with their friends. Many kids were watching reruns of TV shows that not only were from their childhoods, but also from their parents' childhoods. And they were really getting into it and enjoying it. It also became a way of interacting with parents about things that were shared. And all of these kinds of activities were shown to lower their hormone, the hormone cortisol. And cortisol, as you probably know, is the stress hormone that creates the fight or flight mechanism that makes all of us very, very tense and is very bad for the body. So having these outlets was fantastic. And last of all, I saw the most incredible entrepreneurship through social media. It was incredible to me. Kids who like to bake were not only watching baking shows, but also looking at YouTube videos to learn new techniques. They were doing all sorts of crafting kinds of things. I had one 12-year-old who was learning how to hand sew pocketbooks. And I had kids jewelry making. One young man was learning 3D printing. And all of these kids that I'm talking about, different ages from preteen to teens, they learned how to be entrepreneurs. They actually created these hobbies into small businesses. And they were doing this while they were going through the pandemic and continuing it since then. And not only was it empowering, to make money at this age, but it also gave them such a feeling that they were in charge of something in their life. And that was empowering, more than anything else. And I continue to see this sort of thing even after, and think it's just a wonderful thing for parents to kind of see and encourage and realize that the sky's the limit when it comes to these things. So the fourth thing is that I've really been thinking about this a lot. And in fact, I wrote this book kind of by accident, because what happened was, as you heard, my first book, I'm Not Mad, I Just Hate You, that was in press for 20 years. And right before the pandemic, my publisher contacted me and said, we'd love to do a 20th anniversary edition of this book. Would you be interested in updating it? And I said, sure. That was my reflexive reaction. And about 10 minutes later, just after leafing through the book, I realized there's no way I can do this. What are they talking about? Because I started realizing that almost nothing in the book, when I was talking about teens' lives, almost nothing was the same. In 20 years, everything had changed. I was talking about pagers back then. And, the most daring things that kids were doing is maybe double piercing their ears. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, there's just no way that I can update this book. I have to write a whole other book. And in thinking about this, I realized that what had transformed the lives of kids, but also parents who were parenting, was in fact technology, that it was absolutely intricately running through every aspect of kids' development and home lives and teachers as well. And so that's when I decided that I really had to write this new book. And one of the things I was thinking about was the fact that I was seeing this change in my office, of course, in parallel to everything that parents were telling me. And I'll give you some examples. So prior to, let's say, 2011, when cell phones started proliferating, I would really not see any kind of device in my office when people came to see me for a consultation or therapy session. we were just talking, the two of us. Well, after that time, people either had their cell phones in their hands or they removed them from their backpack or their purse, and they would put them on the ledge of the chair. And as you probably know, the research shows that when you are sitting with someone at a table and someone has a cell phone on the table, you are far less likely to talk about things that are more meaningful or intimate. Just having the phone there, even if it doesn't ring, changes the way you interact as a dynamic. Well, this happens all the time, okay? The phone has become sort of part of the dynamic. I feel like I'm not just seeing one person, I'm seeing sort of this other entity at the same time. The other thing is that in therapy now, text messages and posts have kind of supplanted real life conversation in some ways. And I'll tell you what I mean. This is true for adults, by the way, as well as for teenagers. So instead of relating a conversation that someone's had with an important conversation that they want to discuss with me, they say, oh, no, I really want you to get this exactly right. And so they'll spend some time scrolling through their phone, and I'll be waiting, and they'll be looking for this certain text message thread and everything. And then they'll read it to me verbatim. And the same thing happens with posts. And here's a really good example of this. There was a girl that I was seeing who was about 13 when I started seeing her. And she was one of my most technologically advanced, of course, because she was, so young. She became very advanced very quickly. And the medium that she used was Tumblr back then. And she and I had worked together for many years, and she shared very intimate things with me. We had a very trusting relationship. And one day I got a text message from her on a Saturday, and she said, I have to see you. And I said, of course, come over to the office. She had never asked for this before, so I knew something was really up. And she came in and she was pale and she was shaking. And she said she'd had a very traumatic incident happen to her. And she wanted to talk about it. And I said, okay. And what happened was she said, I can't actually tell you. I have to show you. And I said, what do you mean? She said, can I use your laptop? I said, okay. So she took out Tumblr. She got Tumblr on, and she read me a post that she had put on Tumblr that was so intimate, that was so revealing of a traumatic sexual experience that she had. And I thought to myself, this is very interesting. She can't tell it to me, who I know she trusts. She wants to talk to me about it, obviously. But she wrote it on Tumblr where everyone else can read it. And it so skewed my sense of how she was experiencing privacy versus public. It was just very transformational for me to see that. Okay. And in another instance, I had a 17-year-old girl that I was working with who was getting increasingly depressed. And I got a call from her mother one day, and her mother was really, really upset. Now, this is why she was upset. One of her other children had told her that this particular girl had written something on social media about how depressed she was and how she was thinking that she might want to take her own life. And so she admitted this on social media, and the sibling told the mother and father about it. And the mother and father were livid, not that she was feeling this way, but that she had exposed herself in this way on social media. And so again, I felt that the priorities that should be were not the priorities anymore, that technology was kind of taking the focus away from what really needed to be focused on, and also, masking real issues. And what I mean by that is I hear from a lot of parents that they're very concerned that their kids are overusing social media, that they may be addicted, in fact, to being on their phones. I shouldn't just say social media, being on their phones, playing games on their phones, talking to people on the phone. And when I say talking, if you have teens, I don't mean literally talking on the phone. I mean, either text messaging back and forth or direct messaging, or, maybe being on some kind of video chatting kind of device. But invariably, I find that if kids are doing this, it's not the problem, it's the symptom of a problem, that there's a reason why they're withdrawing into this and they're focusing exclusively on their phones. They're trying to avoid feelings, or they're trying to avoid other things in their lives. So that is how I see the landscape changing. So where does that leave parents? Well, so here we are. Now, most parents today who have teens or even preteens, I'm assuming you did not grow up holding a smartphone in your hand that could, give you access to everything in the world, nor did you have social media, right? And so it can be very daunting to raise these digital natives, as we call them, for whom the world, the digital world, cyberspace, is their playground. They can do absolutely anything. And in fact, if you want to really see kids who are phenomenal, it's not even so much the teens now, it's the 9, 10, and 11-year-olds, because they have really been raised with it and they can do anything on the phones. So it can be very daunting to feel like, well, how am I going to be able to supervise my kid when I don't know how to do all this? I'm not an expert. Every time I get a new phone, in fact, I probably need to ask my kid how to set it up, or how to do certain apps, how to troubleshoot certain things. We all do this. I wouldn't be using PowerPoint, in fact, if my son hadn't been living with us during the pandemic, because that's when I learned to do it, because I had to, and he was there and he was an expert. So thank goodness, I benefited from that. I'm not the only one who feels this way, right? But one of the major reasons why I wanted to write this book is that I believe very strongly that in order to parent your child and help them navigate through technology, you don't need to be an expert at all. You don't even need any tech skills. Because in the end, what you really need to be expert in is your own child, and you already are. That's what really matters. So I have found that although this whole adolescent landscape has been transformed, and your parenting, of course, is changing because of that, still the basic principles apply. And what I'm going to talk about for the rest of our time today is how these basic principles of parenting young people can be applied to helping them navigate through technology. So the first one, I think there are 10. So the first one is nurture mutual trust. So many of you are not going to be liking what I say next, which is that you can't completely control what your child does online. I mean, it's just a fact, like it or not. And in fact, I really believe that you can't really control anything that they're doing when they're not in your presence. Once they get a driver's license, for example, and they're driving on their own, you don't know for sure where they're going or what they're doing. And by the same token, anytime that they're out of your presence, when they go to a sleepover or whatever, they go on a field trip, what you have to hope is that you have parented them in a way that you have conveyed your values to them and nurtured all their strengths and taught them important skills, and that they're going to internalize all of that and use them when you're not around. And that's no different from controlling their online activity. So the idea of using parental controls and apps and trackers, I know some parents that I've worked with have used trackers that track their kids' phones when they're driving, is what I mean to say. And they can get information like not only where their kids are, but also how fast their kids are going, if they're using their phones while they're in the car, how fast they accelerate, all kinds of information. And, there's a lot of controversy about all of this. And I had some mixed feelings about this until I did the research for this latest book. Because when I interviewed teens and tweens, I was absolutely shocked at what I heard. I heard that teens and tweens were beyond experts. They were masterful at figuring out workarounds to whatever parental controls or apps or limits their parents put on the phone. I heard dozens of these, and I actually included them in the book because I thought they were so impressive. And I actually interviewed parents who were tech experts, like engineers, and they said that they couldn't even figure out how to use some of these in-app parental controls. And there are so many layers of them and everything, and that they found that they were not very good either. So I ended up believing that they just give parents a false sense of security. And also, I guess the other thing is that I have always believed that as a parent, your most powerful tool in helping your child to grow up to be the kind of young adult you want him or her to be, your most powerful tool is the relationship that you form with them during their whole lives, but particularly during adolescence. And so I really think that the relationship that you create with them, that you develop, nurture over time, is so much more powerful than any app that you can use. Now, trust, I think, is a very two-way street, okay? And so you, of course, want to trust your child, and that can be a prerequisite to giving them certain kinds of technology or freedom or privileges. But also, it has to be reciprocal in that your teen has to trust you as well. And what do I mean by this? So I believe that teens are very, very good at testing out whether they can trust their parents in certain kinds of ways. So can they trust you to be discreet? If they tell you something that's really important to them, can they trust you not to tell it to your best friend or to their grandparents, especially something that will be embarrassing? I hear this all the time. They'll also test you by telling you things that they think you wouldn't exactly like. And it's not going to be about them usually, it'll be about their friends. They'll tell you something about a friend who made a mistake with social media and ended up having a huge problem, or friends who are doing things that they know you wouldn't approve of. And they're looking for your reaction. How are you going to respond to all of this? And they're especially looking to see if you're going to freak out. And if you freak out, then they're going to say to themselves, well, I'm going to avoid that at all costs. If you have the attitude that with technology, just as with anything else, that your tween or teen is going through a learning process. They're not born knowing how to use good judgment, they learn. And so if you have the attitude that along the way, they're going to make mistakes, that they're going to use not such great judgment, and that your job is to help them to problem solve and figure out what went wrong and how they can improve next time. And therefore, you're going to say, okay, this is a teaching moment. Let's figure this out together. And if you do that, then I believe you have a much, much, much greater chance that your kids are going to come to you when you want them to come to you when they have problems, rather than keeping it to themselves or asking their friends who have no more experience or judgment than they do. So if you can be non-punitive and have a kind of accepting, let's talk about this kind of attitude, that goes a long way. So I was going to say something else about not flipping out. Oh, yes. So if they say something about a friend, it gives you a wonderful opportunity to say, okay, well, if you were giving your friend advice, what advice would you give your friend about that? because then you're not the one sort of saying, oh, well, this friend did this wrong. And, you're asking your child to weigh in and use some good problem solving skills, which I think is so much more important. And of course, you don't want to be punitive and say, oh, well, this friend is a really bad influence on you, so you're not allowed to be friends with them anymore. Because at this age, you can't pick your kids' friends. So collaborating is really important. And I've kind of been, talking about this a little bit, but I think it has to be very, very explicit. And a lot of parents ask me, like, what do you do when you give your child their first cell phone or any kind of device that you have some qualms about? And I think it's really important to acknowledge that we aren't the experts on everything. We're the experts on our kids, hopefully, we're attuned to them, but we're not the experts on using technology, and we're not the experts on their teen social environment. There are all sorts of unspoken rules, nuances, and subtleties that they know that we don't know. And if we tell them what to do and we're not respecting their input, then we're going to discourage them from buying into what we're saying, right? And so we want to engage them as much as possible. I'm not saying it's a democracy. You still get the final say. But to say to your kids, you know what, this is going to be a learning experience for both of us. And lots of things are going to come up. Some of the things I'm going to wonder about, you may encounter problems that you don't know how to handle. The best way for us to do this is to put our heads together and talk about what we each know, and we'll figure it out together, one thing at a time. And that sets up a very collaborative relationship rather than an adversarial relationship. And trust me when I tell you that that is key, because when kids feel like you're really going to be there for them to help them and you're not going to be judgmental or punitive, they're going to come to you much more readily. So the big thing about this is if you have younger kids, when you could be sort of the authoritarian and saying, no, you can't do that because I said so. Now you want to encourage a different kind of behavior. And I know this is hard for some parents who were raised in households where kids, were seen and not heard, and they didn't question parents because it was seen as being very rude. But in this case, I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to respect and nurture your kids' developing cognitive abilities and help them to use them, because that's what they need to make good judgments. So when they ask you, well, why are you saying no to this? And they're not making accusations so much, but they really need to know the answer. And so telling them about your reasoning, telling them why you think this way, promotes critical thinking and problem solving on their part. Now, sometimes they might bring up things that you didn't think about. And it's okay to acknowledge that and to say to them, you raised a good point that I didn't think about. So you're not just caving in or capitulating. If you think that they have a valid point, it's okay to say so. But it's also important, as I said, to respect teens' expertise in those unspoken norms. And so asking them rather than telling them is kind of a really good strategy. Ask, don't tell. So I would ask them, okay, so you're going to be using social media now. Show me what you think is a good post and why is that a good post? Or conversely, why is that a bad post? Like, why would people find that offensive? Or where do they draw the line between, let's say, a picture, let's say, that portrays you as being very attractive and all that, appealing, versus one where you're trying too hard or people think it's inappropriate. You want to hear that from their peer perspective, right? Now, you, of course, have your expertise on your teens' needs, their maturity, also the norms in your community, and family values. And the norms in the community are important because, not that you're going to agree with all of them, but sometimes it's easier to delay giving your child technology or using it a lot of the time when their peers don't do that either. If you have a community that kind of agrees that you're going to have certain times that are inappropriate for technology, or if the school, let's just say, necessarily says no cell phones in these kinds of places, then you have support in the community, because you don't want to delay social media or cell phones so long that your kids not only feel left out, but also really aren't given the opportunity to develop these skills as well as they need to use, because they're going to use them. They even use them in school. I had a young man that I'm working with right now who was doing a project on aerospace engineering. And first day of school, he had to do a project that involved making a video and all sorts of those things. So if he hadn't ever done that before, he would have been at a huge disadvantage. So I think it's important to assess all situations. And many people ask me, when is the right time for kids to use thus and such? Or what age is really what they ask. And that is a tricky question, because it's not really a matter of age. It's really a matter of maturity. We all know that during adolescence, at every age, there can be a huge gamut of maturity. Some kids mature faster than others. They usually all catch up. But at any one point in time, you have to be the judge of, does my kid have the right skills, the maturity? Can I trust them? Do they know when they need to ask for help? Will they come to me if there's a problem? Are they really impulsive? There are all sorts of valid parameters that you're going to look like. So really, there's no one right age for the first cell phone. But what I would say is this: there are certain factors that you have to think about, like pragmatics. If your child is doing a lot of away sports games, then they probably need a way to communicate. Or if they're dividing their time between a mother's house and a father's house in a divorce experience, they probably need to have better communication. You all probably don't have very young children, but you might, or you might have grandchildren. And the good thing to know is that if they have those kinds of needs, that they don't need to have a brand new smartphone that connects them to the internet. In fact, they shouldn't have one of those. So there are devices that are available that offer just what kids need. Like there might be 4 or 5 numbers that are pre-programmed to caregivers. So don't think that when you have to say yes, it has to be to a cell phone or to a smartphone, because that's not true. But you're going to ask the same questions that you would ask about every different thing, whether they're ready for the first sleepover, whether they can go to a co-ed sleepover, all kinds of things like that. You're going to ask, well, why is this important now? Does this make sense for this particular child at this particular time? What is their judgment like? What is their impulse like? What are their problem-solving skills like? And you're going to address each teen's unique needs and skills. And what I have to say is probably not going to be, you're not going to be thrilled to hear this either, but it doesn't have to be the same. And it probably shouldn't be the same for different kids, because if you have more than one child in your family, chances are they're not the same. They have completely different needs. I know of twins who need completely different levels of monitoring and supervision. One teen, is basically looking up cat videos, and sharing them with her friends and going on the internet to learn more about spaceships, right? The other one is on social media, sneaking it all the time, having conversations that are inappropriate with people that she doesn't even know. So that's a good example of needing to know like what your kids are doing, using it for, and therefore how involved you have to be to make sure that they're using it correctly. And the other thing is that this is also, not only isn't it a one size fits all, but what makes it even trickier, but I think it's important to pay attention to this, is that this is a constantly evolving process. So things might be going well for a while, and you can think, okay, I don't have to be concerned about this anymore. But then something happens that makes you realize that with all that freedom, your child used some bad judgment. And you'll have to evaluate, was this a one-time thing? Do they know where they went wrong? How can they prevent it again? And these are conversations, of course, that you're having with them. And, for a time, you might have to say, you know what, I lost my trust in you. And therefore, you're going to have to demonstrate to me that you're trustworthy again. And here is how you can do it. So if you have to remove privileges, let's say a cell phone, first of all, you have to consider whether they're going to be adversely affected in school and things like that. But if you do take away the cell phone or an iPad or whatever, it's important to give them a way to earn back the trust rather than just say, you're banned for life, because obviously they're going to be despondent and their lifeline, to the world is gone, and they're going to be very, very upset. I have to read this to you. When I first started interviewing mothers and mostly mothers and teachers and teens and tweens, I was sort of amused, but amazed actually to hear what these people were saying. So I just want to read you one example. I spoke to the mother first, and this is what she told me. When we give our daughter consequences, we've got to hit her where it's the hardest, and that's the phone. Forget grounding her. Taking away her phone is a complete torture to her. She can't live without it. It's as if her father or I passed away. She's sobbing and begging for it back. I literally stare at her with my mouth open and think, are you kidding me? You're having a complete mental breakdown because I took your phone away for the night? It's like you're at a funeral. I cannot believe that just happened. And then the mother said to me, I'm almost sad that I got a phone for her. Now, this girl is 15. So fast forward a couple of weeks, and I talked to this girl, and I don't even ask her a specific question, right? I didn't bring this up because I didn't want to tell her, her mother had told me about this. And this is what she says to me. The other night, my mom got mad at me for the stupidest reason. She was harassing me about one little thing on my floor, and I told her to calm down. So she took my phone away for the night. It's not fair. Why would she do that? I have friends who I have Snapchat streaks with. I have to keep up with them. I have a 107-day streak, and I have to be on it. Streaks are really important to me. I know it's silly, but it's important to me. She took it away for one night, and I almost flipped out. I lost my streaks. It was a rough night. Why doesn't she just ground me? She can't take my phone away. It's a necessity. So that's how teens feel, and why I think we have to be very, very careful about the messages we convey by taking it away. And I really think that actually taking it away for other things wouldn't be my suggestion. I always think that the punishment should fit the crime, if you will. So I think only if they're misusing their technology is a good reason to take it away. And I don't mean that they should be allowed to use it nonstop and have it get in the way of their academics. I don't mean that. But in any event, that was a great example, I thought, of how each sees this whole technology thing. So another thing I think it's important when dealing with kids is to consider the neurobiology. And what do I mean by that? A lot of parents are up in arms because once their kids are on technology, they can't give it up. They look like they're completely addicted. They carry their phone everywhere. They can't talk to people unless their phone is out. They can't go anywhere without it. And parents are usually very annoyed by this. They're really, really irritated. And I think it's important to understand what's going on. So, first of all, technology absolutely and instantly satisfied so many of teens and tweens' normal developmental needs. They crave attention and validation from their peers, which is part of development. And every incoming message that they get lets them feel connected to someone and also tells them that someone's thinking of them. They are important to that one person. It's not that they're forgotten. And so what happens is, with that thrill that they're getting, dopamine, the feel-good hormone, is released in the brain. And as you probably know, dopamine is as hard to resist as most drugs, okay? I mean, when they did animal studies, animals will press that bar for dopamine until they basically die. And so separating teens from their devices causes a kind of not just physical, but also psychological withdrawal. They can get anxious, they can get irritable, they can have meltdowns. This isn't just that they're regressing to a toddler level, it's actually biological. And so understanding this, I think, can inform parenting. So establish guidelines. So if you have high school students, chances are you have established some guidelines already, and it's always easier to do it from the beginning. So I acknowledge that if you have a 15-year-old or 16-year-old who's had a cell phone for years, it's going to be harder to establish that. But you can always say, we need to renegotiate this contract because it's not working for the following reasons. And they're going to, of course, object to that. And your response has to be something on the order of, look, I know you're not happy about this, but my job is to make sure that you're healthy and safe. That's my job. And so if we need to look at this again, we're going to look at it again. So some of these things will come up even, because if you've never talked about it, like if they lose their phone, are they responsible for earning the money to get it back? Or do they expect you to take them right to, the store and get them a brand new phone? And what about if it's stolen or broken? How you handle passwords, permission for social media accounts, privacy and monitoring expectations. I think this is really important because teens need to be taught that nothing is impermanent, nothing is transient on the internet. Everything has a trace, everything can be retrieved. A good rule of thumb is, if you don't want your grandmother to read it, don't write it, right? We have to teach them etiquette about when it's appropriate for them to use their cell phones and not. So I just mentioned a moment ago that so many teenagers will have their phones out when they're in social situations and they're interacting with people who are not there more than people who were there, which is, we have to teach them that cell phones are supposed to help connect them to people, not disconnect them from the people that they're with. And when I interviewed kids, they told me that the reason for this, and this was exacerbated during the pandemic, is that oftentimes they're just not used to so many in-person interactions. And when they're online or on social media or direct messaging somebody, they have time to think about what they're going to say. But in real life, they don't. And they're very, very anxious about not knowing what to say at any particular time. So I think it's important to talk about how to use cell phones when people are around or not, in restaurants, when people are visiting. And it's important to anticipate challenges. And if you have a freshman or a sophomore, maybe this hasn't happened to them yet, but I think it's important to really be direct about it and say, at some point, it's very, very likely that someone is going to ask you for a nude, or someone's going to send one to you that you didn't ask for, or someone is going to bully you, or someone is going to post a video that has you in it without asking your permission. And so by talking about these things ahead of time, you're not in that moment of crisis or difficulty, and kids can be more calm about talking about it. And you can just brainstorm and ask them, how would they react to that situation? So you're getting a sense of their problem solving. You're giving them a chance to practice problem solving and maybe even role playing. And you're also, very importantly, by bringing up the subject, giving them permission to talk about it also, because they know you're not going to flip out. They know you're going to be able to talk about it, and you're okay with that. So speaking of health, I think the most important thing about technology is teaching kids that, just like in other areas of their life, there needs to be a healthy balance between work, play, socialization, and rest. So what are they doing when they're on their devices? This is an important question. Are they mindlessly scrolling or doom scrolling like some of us do? Are they on social media comparing themselves to other people? Are they researching ways to hurt themselves? Or are they using their devices to connect to people that they know? Or are they broadening their social network? Are they learning about different issues that they find, some social issues that they find important, and connecting in a meaningful way to causes? When are they doing it? Are they on their cell phones when they're doing homework? Are they doing it after bedtime or in the middle of the night? So I'm a firm believer that there should be really strict guidelines. And this is one of those kinds of things that you can say at any point. This is starting to interfere with our getting sleep. And when we don't get sleep, our immune system is shot, and we're going to get sick more, and we can't cope with our feelings better, all the different adverse effects of sleep deprivation. And so our family is going to have a new rule. Everybody has to put their phones in the kitchen before we go to sleep, plug them in, and no one's going to be on their phone in the middle of the night, because that has shown to cause all kinds of issues for teens, particularly anxiety and depression. And the last thing is, when they are on their phones, which again, I think can be used, in very positive ways. But the question is, if they're on their phones all the time, what aren't they doing? And there are lots of things that they could be doing that are equally or more important. They could have in-person interactions. They could be outside, exercising, practice their musical instruments, sports, engaging in the arts, all kinds of things that are very, very valuable to them. Oh, okay. So I already mentioned this about teaching digital literacy. But we also have to tell them that when they're out and about with their friends, now that everybody has a cell phone, everybody is a photographer and a videographer, and they are apt to capture and post, let's say, foolish behaviors, but definitely behaviors that your kids would not want on the internet. Okay. I've had so many teens tell me that they were applying for an internship or college or a first job. And guess what? Their future employer, in looking at their history, went on the internet, did a search, and found things that were objectionable, and they did not get these placements. So this is something that they need to think about. It's not everything is fun and games, right? So we have to talk about absent presence, which is what I said before, about when you're with people, you have to give them your full attention. You can't be on your phone all the time, because you're giving them the message that they're not as important as the person you're talking with on the phone. You have to talk about honesty, integrity, and safety. And part of educating them to be good media consumers is teaching them about bias, that the fact that when teenagers look at social media, they overestimate people's good moods by 17%, and they underestimate their bad moods. So whenever they see social media, the message that they're giving themselves is everybody else is happier and cooler and has more friends than I do. But literally, they're all doing that. And I think it's important to use real life examples to convey lessons. Otherwise, I think parents come across as more preachy or moralistic. And I got this great advice from teachers, because teachers who I interviewed also were parents. And they were telling me that when they would tell their kids, you really can't do this or this or that the kids were rolling their eyes and saying, "Oh, mom, what do you know?" But when she talked about specific things that happened to her students in school, obviously without using names, the kids were glued. Then they were like, "What happened? And why did this happen? And how did this happen?" So they really had these great examples to talk about. So if you hear things in the national news or the local news, or something happens with one of your kids, or you hear a story, it's a great thing to say, "Hey, I heard about this. What do you think about it? How would you have handled it? How can the problems be avoided?" So here are some of the skills that I believe are really, really important for kids to be able to navigate cell phones and other technology wisely, safely, judiciously. And these are the kinds of skills that as a parent you would be focused on anyway, but that also have value in terms of technology. So foster authenticity is one of the most important things. This is a time when teens are trying on all sorts of different identities, especially when they come to middle adolescence, when they're figuring out who they are and who they want to be. And they're very vulnerable at this stage to sometimes wanting to please their parents. And if they're getting messages from you about, "Oh, you have to be this way or that way," and then they're not really being authentic, that's going to cause like a chasm between their ideal self and their real self. And it's going to make them more vulnerable to wanting to look a certain way on social media, comparing themselves negatively to other people. You want to make sure that their self-esteem is not coming solely from social media and how many likes they have or how many friends they have. You want to give them real life experiences where they develop self-esteem and competence, so they're not overly reliant on online validation. So important is to help develop emotional regulation. Because when they can identify feelings, when they're comfortable with the fact that they have some positive feelings, but they have some negative feelings, that's all part of the human experience. They don't have to suppress being angry or jealous or resentful, those kind of things. Then they're less apt to come out in kind of impulsive ways, when they're online. You don't want them to just lash out in a way that could be seen as threatening. And I know parents who've gotten phone calls because in one sense, this girl finally stood up to somebody who was harassing her online, and she felt really good about herself. But then her parents got a call from the police that the boy reported her for threatening. So it's important to talk about what is a good way to do this and where does it cross the line. And of course, you want to encourage social problem solving, to be able to have kids directly deal with something rather than doing it behind their back or pretending to be someone else or getting a lot of other people involved online and causing major trauma. So remain vigilant is important because as teens get older and older, their needs change, but also their vulnerability to risk also increases. That is, their brains are literally primed to take risks at a certain point of time. So you want to trust them, but you want to verify and you want to keep vigilant. So are they very jumpy around their phones? Are they compulsively checking their phones more than usual? Are they oversensitive? Do they really flip out when they have to put down their phones? That is a sign that maybe there's something going on online that's making them uncomfortable. If you fear that it's an addiction or that they're being cyberbullied or that there are threats, it's important to check that out Schools are often a very good source of information, guidance counselors or sometimes youth officers. Police stations often have youth officers that will help with this kind of thing. If they've hacked into an account and stolen identity, you and your teen might need support for all of this. So one of the other things I would say about this is that, as always with parents of teens and preteens, we have kind of like no time perspective. Whatever is going on right at this moment, we think, oh, this is it. This is just going to go on forever. It's never going to get better. It's never going to get easier. And it's so not true, of course, and until you've gone through it, and then you realize, hindsight's 2020. But I wanted to end on a very positive note, because I think that there are so many ways that you can use technology and that you will benefit from technology in terms of interacting with your teen or tween. So one is establishing like a code word. And because technology can be used in ways that it's invisible to people who are around your teen. You don't have to talk on the phone, for example, but you can text and you can turn off the sound. So your teen can send you a message and no one is the wiser. And so you can establish a kind of SOS code word where something's going on, your teen's uncomfortable, you don't ask any questions, you just, you know what you're supposed to do, which is, tell your teen you're on your way, and they have an excuse made up, and you take them out of that situation, and then you follow up by not asking them any questions, at least at that moment. And so again, you can use email or something to avoid putting teens in the hot seat and letting them save face. I find that even though teens don't use email in general, except maybe to teachers, this is a great way because they're not forced to respond. It's not synchronous at all or semi-synchronous. They're not expected to with email. So you send them a message that may be a little sensitive or that you want them to think about, and you give them a chance to think about it, and they don't have to respond. They're not in the hot seat, which is great. On the other hand, if you really can't reach them, or if you think something's going on, and you really need to hear their voice because you want to hear the quality of their voice, sometimes like in 1 minute, you kind of get the whole picture, then you call. You can ease worries. I know lots of parents who, when their kids go off to college, say to them, look, I don't need to talk to you. I understand you're going to be busy, but send a text that says I'm alive, or a proof of life picture, just so I know you're okay. And that can be very reassuring. And kids are usually okay about that because you're putting it on yourself. You're saying, look, just it's me. I'm a dad. I'm a mom. It's just me. Bear with me. And they're usually very good to do that. And then as they get older, you can find the modality that works best for them at that particular age as they become young adults. And it will change depending on what kind of job they have, whether they have a spouse, whether they have children, and it keeps changing. And so it's important to remember that you have a lot of options available to you. And I know for me, that's certainly been the case with my kids, and have different needs because of their different kinds of jobs. And lastly, I want to say that, so I have a 3-year-old granddaughter, and she lives in Los Angeles. And I credit technology for the fact that we have been able to stay really, really close throughout her life, because she now knows, like, if she's having breakfast and she wants to FaceTime me, she asks her mom, can I have the phone? And she FaceTimes me, and I keep her company while she's having breakfast, or I say goodnight to her. And having that opportunity has been just a lifesaver for me. So I don't know if any of you are grandparents, but I certainly hope that you get this opportunity one day. I wish it on everyone. And so I'm wondering if anyone has any questions right now. I'm posting this contact and resources for you, ways of getting in touch with me or following me. Gilda, are there any questions?
Well, you've got it. We've got a question in the Q&A in the chat. Thank you. Pages of notes once again. And I wanted to let everyone know this is a really important book. And I did love the foreword from your daughter, who has been on this journey with you, letting all those parents who are in the teen years know that they do come back to us. So that was just a pleasure to read that. So let's take the first question here in the Q&A. I've tried making my kids leave their phones downstairs at night, but I find forcing 17-year-olds and a 15-year-old not so easy. My 12-year-old, no problem, but the older two, how do I get them to leave their phone downstairs at night?
Yes, I'm not surprised by this question. As I said, it's so much easier to institute these things early on. I would ask them what's going on, why they feel the need to have these phones with them, right? Because honestly, like, are they saying that they need it to set an alarm? This is a big excuse that a lot of older teenagers use. But in fact, there's such a thing as alarm clocks. So that doesn't really pay. But I would ask them, because there may be something going on that you can solve a problem a different way, right? And also, it helps to do it for the whole family. If the whole family is doing that, then they don't feel so singled out. There shouldn't be any reason why they need their phone when they're sleeping.
There's a question here in the chat about consequences. How do I consequence my child? We're really struggling with that. I could have been the parent that wrote to you about that. What other consequences can you suggest? Grounding my daughter doesn't seem to impact her, as she'll just stay on the phone. Big problem.
Yes. So as I said, I think that consequences have to fit the crime. And so, for example, if there are consequences for not following rules, then kids have to have those privileges taken away for a time until they can prove that they're trustworthy. And if it's something like the phone, then the phone can be taken away, but they could use, let's say, an iPad to do their schoolwork or things like that. You just can't, because they do so much on their phones that you're punishing them in ways that you don't mean to do, right?
Right.
Also, I would ask kids, sometimes it's really helpful to say, look, this is something that we're working on. It's been very frustrating. I know grounding you doesn't do anything, which at this point it doesn't. What would be an effective way of demonstrating that, or for you to learn that this is something we need to see? And they'll tell you.
There are lots of thank yous so much. Lots of people asking about the recording, and I thank you so sincerely. We're so appreciative when someone says, yes, you may share the recording. It will be on our YouTube channel for the Glenbard Parent Series, also on Roni's page on the website, also in the Glenbard News in a couple of days. Roni, always a pleasure. Always learn from you and enjoy hosting you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for asking me.
Thank you so much.